A fist shot through the air and stopped 1 inch from a man's jaw. The smaller man in front of it did not flinch. He did not step back. He did not even blink. The big man throwing the punch was breathing hard now. Sweating. Confused. 6'2", 220 pounds of trained muscle. A full-contact champion. Undefeated in his career. Never stopped. Never dropped. Never knocked out in the ring. The small man in front of him weighed just 140 pounds soaking wet. His name was Bruce Lee. A camera in the corner of the room was still rolling. Nobody knew the film would survive. Nobody knew the world would ever see what happened in the next 40 seconds. What did Bruce Lee do next that made an undefeated champion lower his hands and back slowly away? Stay with me on this one. The year was 1972. Bruce Lee was 31 years old. He had just finished filming Way of the Dragon in Rome. He was sleeping 4 hours a night and training 6 hours a day. He was back in Los Angeles for only a few weeks before flying back to Hong Kong. And everyone wanted a piece of him. You have to understand what Bruce Lee meant in 1972. He was not yet a global icon. Enter the Dragon had not been released. Most Americans outside the martial arts world had no idea who he was. But inside that world, he was already a legend. Not because of the movies, because of what people had seen him do with their own eyes. Word traveled the way it always does in small worlds. Man to man, dojo to dojo. A karate instructor in San Francisco tells a student in Seattle who tells a tournament fighter in New York. And the story kept coming back the same way. This kid from Hong Kong did things that were not supposed to be possible. He threw punches you could not see. He moved in ways nobody could track. And worst of all, for a lot of people in that world, he said what he thought. He said traditional martial arts was mostly theater. He said most black belts could not fight their way out of a phone booth. He said it in magazines. He said it on television. He said it to anyone who asked. And a lot of people wanted to shut him up. Now here's the thing. Most of those people were all talk. They would grumble about him in the parking lots after tournaments. They would tell their students they could beat him. But very few ever showed up at his door. And the ones who had shown up had left quietly. Nobody wanted to talk about what happened inside. In the spring of 1972, one man finally did show up. And he was different. He was the first man in a long time who walked in believing he was actually going to win. And he had every reason to believe it. He was a full-contact karate champion out of the East Coast circuit. 34 years old. 6'2", 220 pounds. Former Marine. He had boxed heavyweight in the service. And for the last 4 years he had been fighting full-contact karate, the brutal new sport where two men hit each other for real until one went down and stayed there. No points. No touch and go. And he had not lost. Not once. 27 fights. 17 knockouts. No losses. No draws. He was fresh off a tournament in Long Beach. He heard Bruce Lee was in town. He told his backers, and yes, there were backers because there was money riding on those fights. He wanted a private meeting with Bruce Lee. No tournament. No referee. No gloves. And no photos afterward. Bruce Lee said yes. He said yes for a reason most people never understood. He did not care about ego. He had nothing to prove to some karate champion from the East Coast. But he cared obsessively about testing his methods in real conditions. His whole system, Jeet Kune Do, was built on the idea that real fighting was nothing like sport. He was always looking for fighters who would come at him for real. A full-contact champion walking into his studio was exactly what he wanted. The meeting was set for a Tuesday afternoon. The place was Bruce Lee's small private studio in Culver City. Not Chinatown. Not the Kung Fu Institute. A private room he used mostly for filming his own training footage. 6 of his students were there that day. One camera was set up in the corner on a tripod. That was how Bruce Lee worked. He filmed himself. He reviewed the footage at night. It was how he improved. The champion arrived at 1 o'clock. He was alone. Jeans. Plain gray t-shirt. a canvas gym bag over his shoulder. He walked into the studio like he already owned it. He looked at the students. He looked at Bruce Lee, and he smiled. It was not a friendly smile. It was the smile of a man who had already decided how the next hour was going to go. The students in the corner felt it. One of them said later that the room went cold the moment the champion walked in. Bruce Lee did not smile back. He just bowed. He offered the champion water. The champion shook his head. He wanted to get started. He dropped his gym bag by the door. He cracked his neck, and he stepped onto the mat. The two men faced each other without bowing to each other. The champion raised his hands into a boxing stance. Tight, high guard, classic. He was not going to waste time. He was going to wear Bruce Lee down and then take him apart. Bruce Lee did not take a stance. He stood there with his hands relaxed at his sides, his weight slightly forward on the balls of his feet, his eyes on the champion's chest. Not his hands, not his face, his chest. That is how Bruce Lee read fighters. The chest moves before anything else does. Hands lie, faces lie, chests tell the truth. The champion waited for a second. Then he came. He threw a lead jab straight at Bruce Lee's face. Fast, professional, the kind of jab that had knocked out 17 men. It never landed. Bruce Lee was not there. He had moved. Not dodged. Not leaned. Moved. His entire body had shifted 6 inches to the outside of the champion's arm. Before the jab had finished extending, Bruce Lee was beside him. He tapped the champion's ribs. A light touch, almost friendly. Just enough to say, I could have put my fist through your kidney, but I chose not to. The champion pulled back. He frowned. He had felt the touch. He had not seen the movement. He came again. This time with a combination. Jab, cross, low kick. The whole sequence was supposed to end with the champion's shin buried in Bruce Lee's thigh. The jab missed. The cross missed. The kick hit air. Bruce Lee was a full step to the side. He was smiling slightly, not a mocking smile, just a fighter's smile, the kind you get when something is working exactly the way you hoped. The champion started to breathe harder. Now, if you have ever watched full-contact karate, you know what happens when a professional fighter cannot land clean. He gets angry. The anger tightens his movement. The tighter he gets, the more predictable he becomes. And the more predictable he gets, the easier he is to hit. Bruce Lee knew this. He was letting it happen. For the next 2 minutes, the champion threw everything he had. Straight punches, hooks, spinning kicks, elbows, knees. He even tried to grab Bruce Lee and take him to the ground. Nothing landed. Not once. Bruce Lee moved around him the way water moves around a rock. He was always there. He was never there. And every 15 seconds or so, Bruce Lee would tap him. A finger on the sternum. A knuckle on the floating rib, a flat palm on the side of the neck, just enough to say, I am still hitting you. You just do not feel it yet. The students had stopped breathing. They had watched Bruce Lee train 1,000 times. They had sparred with him. They had taken his corrections. But they had never seen him face a full-contact champion. And what they were seeing now did not compute. The champion was not just losing. He was being taught a lesson in real time. Every move he threw was a mistake that Bruce Lee had already predicted and was punishing with a touch. The champion's eyes were starting to change. Not from pain, from something worse. He was realizing what had happened. He had walked into this room thinking he was the predator. He had been wrong. He had walked into a cage with something he did not have a category for. By the 3-minute mark, the champion was drenched in sweat. His mouth hung open. His guard had started to drop. His eyes were wild. And then Bruce Lee stepped in. It was the first real strike he threw that day. It was a vertical fist. A short, straight punch traveling maybe 6 inches. It did not look like much. It hit the champion just under the sternum. It was a punch Bruce Lee had been developing for years. He called it the 1-inch punch in public demonstrations. He had shown it on stage. People had seen it knock men backward out of folding chairs. But on stage, he used it gently. He never used it at full power. Full power was something else. full power, the 1-inch punch did not push a man backward. It drove the shock straight through the chest cavity and into the diaphragm. It stunned the muscles that let a man breathe. That was what hit the champion. That was what stopped him. The champion made a noise nobody in the room had ever heard a grown man make. Half grunt, half wheeze. His knees bent. His arms dropped. He staggered 2 steps backward and dropped onto the mat on his hands and knees. He was trying to breathe. He could not. The students in the corner froze. One of them had his hand over his mouth. The camera in the corner was still rolling. Caught everything. The sound of the hit. The dry rasp of a grown man fighting for air. The silence of the rest of the room. Bruce Lee did not move to finish him. He just watched. Hands at his sides again. Breathing easy. He had not broken a sweat. After about 20 seconds, the champion got his first real breath back. He looked up at Bruce Lee. His eyes were red from the pressure. He was not crying. He was just a man who had been punched harder than he had ever been punched in his entire career. He nodded once. Slowly. "Enough," he said. He pushed himself to his feet. He walked over to the wall where his gym bag was. He picked it up. He slung it over his shoulder. He turned back toward Bruce Lee. He bowed. It was a proper bow. Low. Formal. A man acknowledging something that went beyond the fight. He held it for 3 seconds. Then he straightened up. He said quietly, "I respect you." Bruce Lee bowed back. Same depth. Same 3 seconds. The champion walked to the door. The students in the corner exhaled all at once. One of them laughed nervously. Another started clapping, then stopped when he realized nobody else was. Bruce Lee walked over to a small wooden stand where he kept his training journal. He picked up a pencil. He sat down on a low bench. He started writing. The champion had his hand on the door handle. Everyone in the room believed it was over. It was not. The champion reached for the door handle. His fingers closed around it. He began to turn it. And in that moment, every person in that studio believed the same thing. It was over. The champion was leaving. He had bowed. He had said his piece. He was going home. Bruce Lee had already picked up his pencil. The students had started breathing again. Even the camera on the tripod, still rolling, felt like it was winding down toward an ending. Now, before I tell you what happened next, because what happened next is the reason this story exists, I want to say one thing directly to you. If you've made it this far, hit that subscribe button. Seriously, there are a lot of these legendary moments out there, and most of them get buried or twisted by the time they reach you. Subscribe so the next one lands in your feed first. Go on. I will wait. Okay, back to it. The door opened before the champion could pull it. It opened from the outside. A hand pushed it in. A man stepped through. Then another man behind him. Then a third. They were all big. Not the champion's size. Just big. All 3 wore dark jackets. One of them had a leather case under his arm. Another had his hand inside his jacket. The 3 men stood in the doorway. The champion stopped. He looked at them. His face changed. Not from surprise. From something worse. He was not surprised. He was afraid. Understand what that means. A 6'2" former Marine who had just taken the hardest punch of his life without making a sound. That man was suddenly afraid of the 3 men who had just walked in. The first man stepped forward. He looked past the champion. He looked directly at Bruce Lee. He did not bow. He did not introduce himself. He just spoke. "Where is the camera?" It was not a question. The students in the corner did not move. They knew. You develop an instinct for it in that kind of world. This was not a second round. This was something else. These men were not there to fight Bruce Lee. They were there to take what Bruce Lee had. The footage. The tape. The proof that their fighter had lost. Because in their world, their fighter could not have lost. Their fighter was carrying money. A lot of it. Contracts for upcoming bouts in Japan. Endorsement deals. A rematch tour that had already been pre-sold to television in 2 countries. All of it was built on one thing, the idea that the champion was undefeated. If the film got out, the whole thing collapsed. The bets. The contracts. The machine behind him. Gone. These were men who did not care about martial arts. They cared about money. They had put hundreds of thousands of dollars into their fighter's career. They had made arrangements with networks. They had placed bets. They had shaken hands on things that could not be undone if the champion was seen losing on film. In their world, a man who had lost publicly was worthless. Worse, he was a liability. He was a walking debt. And the easiest way to erase a debt was to erase the evidence. They were not there to take revenge. They were there to delete history. The first man took another step into the room. He pointed at the camera on the tripod. He said again, "The camera. Now." Bruce Lee had not moved from his bench. He had the pencil in his hand, the journal open. He did not even look up. He said one word. "No." The man reached inside his jacket. Not quickly, slowly, deliberately. He wanted Bruce Lee to see what was coming. His hand came back out with a short blade. A filleting knife. Thin, sharp. Something you could slide between ribs without effort. He held it at his side. He was not brandishing it. He did not need to. The meaning was clear. He said, "I will ask one more time. The camera." And this is the part where most men in Bruce Lee's position would have given up the camera. He was one man. There were three of them. One of them had a blade. The others had their hands inside their jackets. Bruce Lee had no weapon. He had no way out. But Bruce Lee did not give up the camera. Because the camera was not the point anymore. The moment that first man had stepped into the room and pointed at something Bruce Lee owned and demanded it, the whole thing had changed shape. This was no longer about a fight. It was no longer about pride. This was about whether Bruce Lee's own studio, his private space, the place where he kept his notebooks and his 13 years of research, could be walked into by strangers who decided they had the right to take whatever they wanted. If he gave up the camera today, they would be back next month for something else. Every serious fighter in America would learn that the way to handle Bruce Lee was to show up with friends and a blade and ask nicely. He stood up from the bench. He placed the pencil on top of the journal. He closed the journal. He walked slowly into the center of the mat. He did not hurry. He did not raise his hands. He just walked. The champion was still standing by the door. He was watching. He had not moved. His face was still pale from the punch that had stopped his breath. But something else was happening in his eyes now. He was about to watch something he was never supposed to see. Bruce Lee looked at the three men. He said, "You should go now." The man with the knife smiled. He took a step forward. And the camera in the corner caught everything. What happened in the next 8 seconds has never been matched on film before or since. And it is the reason this tape, when it finally surfaced, rewrote everything people thought they understood about Bruce Lee. He did not throw the first punch. He waited. He stood in front of the three men, hands still at his sides, feet slightly apart. Wait forward. And he waited for the man with the knife to commit. The man did not wait long. He lunged. A short lunge. Low. The blade coming up at an angle, aimed at the space just under Bruce Lee's ribs. It was a professional knife attack. Not a movie slash. A real attack. Tight. Committed. Hard to see coming unless you were already reading it. Bruce Lee was reading it. His left hand came up and across in a motion no one in the room fully saw. It did two things at once. It redirected the blade outward, and it trapped the man's wrist. His right hand came up at the same time, not in a punch but in a flat, open-handed strike to the hollow of the throat. Not hard enough to crush the windpipe, just hard enough to take the wind and the will out of the man. The knife hit the floor. The man dropped to his knees, both hands at his throat, trying to breathe. The second man came in from the left. He had pulled his hand out of his jacket. There was a pistol in it. Small. Snub-nosed. He was swinging it up to point at Bruce Lee's chest. Bruce Lee moved. He closed the distance in what looked like a single step. The gun hand was still coming up. It never got there. Bruce Lee's left hand intercepted the wrist from underneath. He drove it upward and outward in the same motion. The barrel pointed at the ceiling for a single moment. Then it was gone. Bruce Lee had rotated the wrist backward with one hand and stripped the pistol with the other in a motion so clean it looked rehearsed. But it was not rehearsed. Bruce Lee had never done this exact sequence with this exact man before. He had done something like it 10,000 times against students. What the camera caught was a man using his entire life's work in 3/4 of a second against a real threat. One of the students later described it this way. He said it looked like Bruce Lee had read the man's mind a half-second before the man had thought of it. He said the hand came up before the gun got there. He said he did not understand how Bruce Lee had covered that distance. He said he had watched the footage over 30 times after it was recovered, frame by frame, and he still could not explain it. The second man staggered backward, holding a wrist that was no longer facing the right direction. He made a sound, a small sound. He was trying not to scream in front of the others. The third man froze. He was the biggest of the three. He had his hand inside his jacket. He had not drawn. He was staring at Bruce Lee. His mouth had opened slightly. His hand was still inside the jacket. And here is the part the camera caught that changed everything. Bruce Lee did not attack him. He walked up to the third man. Not fast. Not slow. He walked. He stopped an arm's length away. He looked into the man's eyes. He did not say anything. He just looked. The third man took his hand out of his jacket. Slowly. Empty. He raised both hands to chest height. Palms out. The universal gesture. Bruce Lee nodded once. He turned and walked back to the center of the mat. He looked at the first man, still on his knees, still trying to breathe. He said, "Get up." The man got up. He looked at the second man, cradling his ruined wrist. He said, "Take him to a hospital." The second man nodded. He looked at the third man. He said, "Take the knife. Take the gun. Walk out. Do not come back." The third man picked up the knife from the floor. He picked up the pistol. He did not argue. He did not posture. He walked to his partner. He put an arm around his shoulders to help him stand. The champion had not moved the whole time. He was still by the door. His face was the color of paper. He was looking at Bruce Lee like a man who had just seen something he did not know existed. The three men walked past him on their way out. None of them looked at him. The champion stepped aside. He watched them go. Then he looked back at Bruce Lee. He said something the camera caught, but nobody in the room fully understood at the time. He said, "I thought I had already lost." Bruce Lee did not respond. The champion's words sat in the room for a long moment before anyone understood them. He had lost. He knew he had lost. He had bowed and walked toward the door. But, "I thought I had already lost" was not about the fight. It was about what he had just watched. He had just watched Bruce Lee disarm two armed men and freeze a third without throwing a single committed strike. He realized in that moment what Bruce Lee had done to him earlier. Bruce Lee had not been testing him. Bruce Lee had been being gentle. The champion stood there for another 10 seconds. Then he turned. He walked out of the studio. The door closed behind him. The studio was silent. One of the students started to cry. Not loud, just tears. He sat down on the floor where he was standing and put his face in his hands. The others did not move. Bruce Lee walked over to the camera on the tripod. He looked at it. He reached up. He pressed the button that stopped the film. The reel kept spinning for another second. Then it stopped. It had caught 8 seconds of something nobody was ever supposed to see. The door stayed closed for a long time. Nobody in the studio said anything. The student on the floor wiped his eyes. Another student got up quietly and poured a glass of water from the jug in the corner. He brought it to Bruce Lee. Bruce Lee took it. He drank half of it. He set it on the bench. He picked up his pencil. He opened the journal. He did not write about the three men. He did not write about the gun. He did not write about the knife. He wrote about the champion. He wrote 3 sentences. The student who cleaned out the studio after Bruce Lee's death found the journal in a box of old training notes. The 3 sentences were still there, in Bruce Lee's handwriting. They read, "He was a strong fighter. He was a decent man. I hope he finds peace." That was all. The footage was a different story. Bruce Lee took the reel out of the camera that evening. He did not develop it himself. He took it to a film lab he trusted. He had the lab process the film. He watched it exactly one time alone in a small screening room off Sunset Boulevard. Then he had it sealed into a metal canister. He marked the canister with a date and nothing else. He put it in a box of other private films. The box went into a locked cabinet in his home office. He told one person about what was on it. His wife. Not the details. Just that it existed. He said to her, "Someday, when I am old, I will decide whether to burn it or release it. Not now." He never got to decide. Bruce Lee died on July 20th, 1973, just over a year after that afternoon in Culver City. He was 32 years old. After his death, his private films were handled by his estate. Most of them were catalogued and archived. A few were shown to researchers over the years. The metal canister with the unmarked date was not one of them. Nobody at the estate knew what was on it. It was filed under miscellaneous training and forgotten. It sat in that archive for 46 years. In 2019, a documentary film team was given access to the Bruce Lee archives for a new project about his training methods. One of the archivists, a young woman who had spent 3 years cataloging the private films, came across the canister. She checked her log. It had never been digitized. She brought it in. They ran it on an old projector. The first thing they saw was the studio in Culver City. The students in the corner. Bruce Lee on his bench with a pencil. Then the champion walking in. Then the fight. Then the bow. Then the door opening. Then the 8 seconds. The room where they were watching went silent. The lead researcher stood up and walked out of the room. He needed to be somewhere else. The archivist sat there watching it on loop. She watched it 17 times that afternoon before anyone else saw it. She said later that she did not understand what she had watched until the 4th viewing. By the 7th, she started to cry. By the 12th, she understood why Bruce Lee had never released it. It was not a fight scene. It was a man showing everything he could do and choosing not to use most of it. That is why it changed the record. Every other film of Bruce Lee shows him performing, acting, choreographing, training, demonstrating. The lost reel from 1972 shows him doing none of those things. It shows him using his entire system in a real situation with real stakes and making choices no performer would ever make. The throat strike that stops short of crushing. The wrist lock that disables without killing. The stare that turns a man around without a word. Martial arts researchers have watched the 8 seconds thousands of times since 2019. The general agreement is simple. Nobody does this now. Nobody has ever done this. Whatever Bruce Lee was, he was not what people thought he was. He was something else. As for the full contact champion, he lived until 2007. He never fought professionally again after that Tuesday afternoon in 1972. Officially, he retired to recover from an injury. Unofficially, he told one journalist, years later, that he had met a man in Los Angeles who had taken apart his life's work in 4 minutes and sent him home whole. That was the only interview he ever gave about it. He never named Bruce Lee, but he said this one thing in that interview that the journalist wrote down word for word. "I thought I knew what a fighter was. I walked into that studio and I found out I had never met one. And that is the story. A piece of film nobody was supposed to see. A confrontation nobody was supposed to survive. A reel that sat in a cabinet for 46 years, waiting for the world to catch up. A fist shot through the air and stopped 1 inch from a man's jaw. A camera in the corner was still rolling. Turned out the story was not about the punch that stopped. It was about the man who stopped it, and the film that survived long enough to show it.